Noah stood at the edge of the forest, his breath visible in the cool morning air. It had been years since he disappeared, leaving behind the home, the life, and the family he thought he'd built. But here she was, Rachel, standing just a few feet away, her eyes locking onto his with a mix of determination and regret. His heart raced as memories surged like a flood. The woman who had torn his world apart was now the one chasing the shattered pieces. It took him a minute to draw himself back to her side. She was looking back at him with intensity, her eyes glistening. Before we dive deeper into Noah's story of betrayal, disappearance, and the confrontation years in the making, let us know where you're watching this story unfold from. And if this tale has captured your attention, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss any of the compelling stories we share. Noah fumbled with his keys as he unlocked the front door, the weight of the day pressing heavy on his shoulders. The house greeted him with an unsettling silence, the kind that seemed too loud in its emptiness. He stepped inside, and the faint scent of lavender lingered in the air, a scent Rachel always loved. Normally it comforted him, but tonight, it felt strange, almost misplaced. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound breaking the stillness. The dim light from a table lamp spilled across the living room, casting long, distorted shadows that danced on the walls. Noah set his bag down, his movements slow and deliberate, his exhaustion making even the simplest tasks feel monumental. He moved toward the kitchen, intending to pour himself a drink, but something tugged at the corner of his vision. His study door was ajar. That was odd. He distinctly remembered closing it before leaving for work. He hesitated for a moment, the quiet now feeling oppressive. Pushing the door open, Noah stepped inside. His desk, usually a chaotic mess of papers and notes, looked untouched, save for one thing. A manila folder lay dead center, as if placed there intentionally. His brow furrowed as he approached it, his pulse quickening. The folder felt heavier than it should as he picked it up. The words paternity test results stared back at him in bold, clinical lettering. He flipped it open, his hands trembling slightly. His eyes scanned the page, searching for meaning in the medical jargon until one line screamed at him, probability of paternity, 0%. His stomach dropped. The world seemed to tilt as he reread the line, his mind struggling to comprehend what it meant. Evan isn't mine. The thought stabbed through him like an icy dagger. His legs threatened to buckle, but he gripped the edge of the desk, forcing himself to stay upright. Noah's breath hitched as memories flashed unbidden, Evan's first steps, his infectious laugh, the way he called him, Dad, with so much love and trust. All of it felt like it was being ripped away, one thread at a time. His throat tightened as his vision blurred. No, he whispered, his voice barely audible. This can't be real. In that moment, his entire life felt like a lie. But the worst was yet to come. Noah sat in the darkened study, the folder still clutched in his hands. The silence was deafening, broken only by the uneven rhythm of his breathing. His mind raced, piecing together fragments of the past 8 years with Rachel. Her smile flashed in his memory, warm, radiant, the kind of smile that could light up the darkest of days. How many times had he trusted that smile, believing it held no secrets? And yet, there had been moments, little things that didn't add up. Late nights at the office. Vague explanations. That one argument about Evan's birth, which he had brushed off so quickly he hadn't thought to press further. Noah clenched his fists, crumpling the edges of the folder. Had it all been there, right in front of me, and I was just too blind to see it? He thought of Evan. His boy. The boy who wasn't his. The thought twisted in his gut, an unbearable weight pressing on his chest. He remembered the first time he held Evan in his arms, his tiny hand gripping Noah's finger as if to say, I trust you. He had promised himself that day he would never let him down. But now he wasn't even sure who he was in Evan's life. A fraud? A stand-in? Rachel's laugh, once the melody of his morning, now sounded like a bitter echo of deceit. Noah gritted his teeth, his nails digging into his palms. He had built his world around Rachel and Evan, a world that now felt as fragile as glass, shattering with every memory that surfaced. "How could you do this, Rachel?" he muttered, his voice cracking. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the room seemed to close in around him. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "You'll have to confront her. You'll have to know the truth. But can you handle it?" Noah stared at the folder again, the bold letters blurring as tears welled in his eyes. For the first time in his life, he felt truly lost. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, its warmth contrasting sharply with the cold storm brewing inside Noah. He stood in the doorway, the manila folder clutched tightly in his hand. Rachel was at the stove, humming softly as she flipped pancakes, unaware of the turmoil about to unfold. Without a word, Noah walked to the table and slammed the folder down. The sound echoed, cutting through the room like a gunshot. Rachel froze, the spatula hovering midair. Slowly, she turned to face him, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What's this?" she asked, her voice tentative. Noah's chest heaved. "Why don't you tell me?" Rachel's gaze darted to the folder. Her hands trembled as she wiped them on a dish towel. "Noah, I don't understand." "Don't lie to me," Noah's voice cracked, raw with anger and hurt. He shoved the folder toward her. "Open it." She hesitated, her face paling. When she finally flipped it open, her reaction was immediate, a sharp intake of breath followed by a stammered denial. This isn't right. It's a mistake." Noah's laugh was bitter, almost cruel. "A mistake? That's the best you've got? A mistake?" Rachel stepped closer, reaching for him, but he recoiled. "Noah, please. It happened before we were married. I didn't think it mattered. You're Evan's father. You always have been." His head shook, disbelief twisting his features. "You didn't think it mattered? You didn't think I mattered? You let me believe, no, you let me build my entire life around a lie." His voice rose with each word, his composure unraveling. Rachel's tears began to fall. "I was scared. I didn't want to lose you. I thought if you knew, you wouldn't marry me." Noah slammed his fist on the table, making her flinch. "You stole my choice, Rachel. You stole my right to know. Don't you dare make this about your fear." Rachel's sobs grew louder, her voice breaking. "It didn't matter, Noah. You've been his father in every way that counts. Biology doesn't change that." His vision blurred with rage and heartbreak, words tangling in his throat, choking him. He turned away, gripping the back of a chair to steady himself. "I can't even look at you right now." The room spun as the weight of her betrayal crushed him. He couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't believe the woman he trusted for 12 years had done this to him. Noah sat in his car, the engine idling in the darkness. He couldn't go back into that house, not now. His chest felt hollow, as if all the air had been sucked out of his lungs, leaving only the raw ache of betrayal. The manila folder lay crumpled on the passenger seat, its contents burned into his memory. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white, before finally shifting into gear. The drive to his old apartment was a blur. The streets were nearly empty, the faint hum of streetlights the only sound accompanying the thrum of the tires on asphalt. The apartment was just as he'd left it years ago, small, dusty, and cold. The smell of stale air greeted him as he unlocked the door, a stark reminder of a life he thought he'd left behind. Inside, silence pressed in on him, thick and suffocating. The single couch in the corner sagged with neglect, and the cracked coffee table was still littered with coasters and an old magazine. Noah stood motionless for a moment, staring at the remnants of his younger self, before crossing to the cabinet. He found a bottle of whiskey, its amber contents untouched. His hands shook as he poured himself a glass, the liquid sloshing against the sides. The first sip burned his throat, but it wasn't enough to drown out the storm inside him. He downed the rest in one go, his mind replaying the scene from earlier that morning, Rachel's tear-streaked face, her trembling hands, her words, "You've been his father in every way that counts." The glass hit the table with a thud as a bitter laugh escaped him. "In every way that counts," he muttered, the words dripping with contempt. But then Evan's face flashed in his mind, and the anger faltered. His son. His son. Smiling up at him as they played catch in the backyard. The pride in Evan's eyes when Noah cheered him on at his soccer games. The bedtime stories, the scraped knees, the whispered, "I love you, Dad," before sleep. Noah's heart twisted painfully. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered into the empty room. The silence offered no answer, only the creak of the old apartment settling around him. He poured another glass, his thoughts spiraling. The betrayal cut deep, but the thought of losing Evan cut even deeper. How could he stay, knowing the foundation of his marriage was a lie? How could he leave and risk hurting the boy who still saw him as a hero? The whiskey provided no clarity, only a dull numbness that failed to extinguish the fire raging within him. Noah ran a hand through his hair, his jaw clenched. His reflection stared back at him from the darkened window, a man he barely recognized. Was it all a lie? He asked himself, the question heavy with desperation. Memories came in fragments, each one sharper than the last, Rachel's laugh, her hand in his as they vowed forever, the way she'd cradled Evan in the hospital room while Noah swore to protect them both. Each image felt like a shard of glass slicing into his chest. He wanted to hate her, to let the anger consume him. But the love he still felt for his family lingered, stubborn and unyielding. The room grew colder as the hours stretched on, but Noah didn't move. The whiskey bottle sat on the table, the liquid inside dwindling as the night crept toward dawn. The nearly empty whiskey bottle sat on the table, a testament to Noah's inability to escape the thoughts that circled endlessly in his mind. He buried his face in his hands, the weight of the truth bearing down on him like a leaden shroud. Dust settled in the air around him, undisturbed by the world outside. Finally, as dawn's light seeped through the blinds, Noah sat back and stared at the ceiling. His voice was hoarse as he muttered, "I don't know if I can forgive you, Rachel. But I don't know if I can let him go, either." The room offered no solace, only the faint echo of his own pain. The morning air was crisp as Noah parked his car outside a modest office building. The address he'd found for Daniel had led him here, to a small accounting firm in the middle of town. He sat for a moment, staring at the building, his heart pounding in his chest. The name felt foreign and yet uncomfortably familiar, like a splinter lodged deep under his skin. Daniel, the man who had unknowingly changed everything. Noah stepped out of the car, his breath visible in the cold. The sound of his boots on the pavement filled the silence, each step feeling heavier than the last. Inside, the receptionist looked up with a polite smile. "I'm here to see Daniel Parker," Noah said, his voice strained but steady. The receptionist nodded, gesturing toward a small conference room. Noah thanked her and entered. The room was sparsely furnished, just a table, a few chairs, and a bland piece of art on the wall. Noah paced the room, his anger simmering just below the surface. The door opened, and Daniel walked in. He was about Noah's age, clean-cut with sharp features and an easy confidence. But that confidence faltered as his eyes met Noah's. "Can I help you?" Daniel asked, his tone wary. Noah wasted no time. "You don't know me, but I'm Noah Carter, Rachel's husband." Daniel froze, his expression shifting from confusion to unease. "Rachel," he repeated. "I haven't seen her in, over a decade." Noah's jaw tightened. "She says you're Evan's father." The room seemed to shrink, the weight of the revelation pressing down on both men. Daniel's face contorted in disbelief. "What?" he said sharply. "That's not possible." Noah reached into his jacket and pulled out a copy of the paternity test, sliding it across the table. This says otherwise. Daniel picked up the paper, his hands trembling slightly as his eyes scanned the document. He shook his head, setting it down with a hard exhale. I didn't know. She never told me. He paused, running a hand through his hair. This doesn't make sense. We weren't serious, it was just a fling. Noah's stomach churned. The room felt suffocating as he leaned forward. Did you know she was engaged? Daniel's eyes widened, his expression shifting from guilt to shock. Engaged? No. She told me she wasn't seeing anyone. He let out a bitter laugh, disbelief etched into his features. So she lied to me, too. Noah's hands curled into fists at his sides. She married me, never said a word about you, never gave me the chance to decide if I could live with this. His voice broke, the anger mixing with exhaustion. Daniel leaned back in his chair, his face pale. I swear to you, I didn't know. If I had, I would have, he trailed off, shaking his head. She never even hinted at something like this. She just stopped calling. I figured it was over and moved on. The words hung in the air, each one twisting the knife deeper into Noah's gut. He studied Daniel, searching for some sign of deception, but there was none, just another victim of Rachel's lies. For a moment, neither man spoke, the silence thick with shared betrayal. Then Daniel broke it, his voice quieter, almost apologetic. Look, I don't know what you're going through right now, but I had no idea. I don't want anything to do with this. I have my own life now. Noah's throat tightened as he stood. I don't want you to be involved. This isn't about you. It's about me, my son, and the woman who tore my life apart. Daniel nodded, his expression one of reluctant understanding. For what it's worth. I'm sorry. For both of us. Noah turned to leave, the weight of the conversation pressing down on him. But just as he reached the door, Daniel's voice stopped him. If she lied about me, what else is she hiding? The words hit like a gut punch, echoing in Noah's mind as he walked out of the building. The cold air outside did little to clear the storm raging inside him. If she could lie to me for 12 years, what else had she hidden? The question followed him, relentless and unforgiving, as he drove away. Noah parked outside Megan's house, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. The drive over had been a blur, his mind circling around Daniel's parting words. If she lied about me, what else is she hiding? Now, he was here, at the door of the one person who might have answers. The sound of his knuckles rapping on the door seemed louder than it should have been on the quiet suburban street. A moment later, Megan opened it, her face lighting up with surprise that quickly shifted to concern. Noah, she said hesitantly, glancing over his shoulder as if to see if Rachel was with him. Is everything okay? He wasted no time. I need to talk to you, he said, his voice firm. About Rachel. Megan's expression tightened. This doesn't seem like the kind of conversation. We should have, Megan said at the door, stepping aside. Come in. Inside, the house was warm and smelled faintly of cinnamon. It was the kind of comforting ambience Noah might have appreciated once, but now it only made his stomach churn. He followed Megan into the living room and sat stiffly on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped in front of him. I found out about Daniel, Noah began, his words clipped. Megan's face paled, and she immediately looked away. That was all the confirmation he needed. You knew, didn't you? Megan sighed heavily, sitting down across from him. Noah, it's not what you think. Don't, he cut her off, his voice rising. Don't try to spin this. Just tell me the truth. Did you know? She hesitated, her eyes filled with guilt. I suspected, she admitted softly. Years ago, before you and Rachel got married, she told me about this fling she had with some guy. She was a mess about it, guilty, scared. I thought she'd tell you. You thought. Noah snapped, leaning forward. You thought she'd tell me? You didn't think maybe I deserved to know? Megan's voice trembled. I didn't think it would come to this. I thought it was over. She swore to me it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything. And then you two got married, and I didn't want to ruin that for you. Noah shot to his feet, pacing the room as his anger boiled over. So you just let me live in this fantasy? 12 years, Megan. 12 years of my life, based on a lie, and you knew. Tears welled in her eyes. I didn't know Evan wasn't yours, Noah, I swear. I thought it was over before she even met you. You didn't think, he interrupted bitterly. No, of course you didn't. Because if you had, maybe I wouldn't be here now, trying to pick up the pieces of a life I don't even recognize. The room fell silent, the tension thick and suffocating. Megan wiped at her eyes, her guilt palpable. I'm sorry, Noah, she whispered. I should have said something. I didn't know how. Noah stopped pacing, his back to her. His voice, when he finally spoke, was low and hoarse. Did anyone else know? Does anyone else know the truth about my family, about my son? No, Megan said quickly. I was the only one she told, and I swear I never told anyone else. Noah turned to face her, his eyes burning with betrayal. So I'm the last to know. The husband. The father. The fool. Megan shook her head desperately. You're not a fool, Noah. You're a good man. A good father. Nothing about that has changed. But her words rang hollow. Noah's mind swirled with questions, each one cutting deeper than the last. Had my entire marriage been a lie? Had I been the only one who believed in us? I can't do this, he muttered, moving toward the door. Megan stood, following him. Noah, wait. Please, don't blame Evan for this. He's innocent in all of this. Noah paused, his hand on the doorknob, his jaw tightening. I know he is. But Rachel, she's not. Without another word, he stepped outside, the cold air stinging his face. The truth Megan had revealed didn't bring clarity, it only added another layer to the betrayal. Noah climbed into his car, gripping the wheel as he stared blankly at the road ahead. If she lied to me once, she could lie again. What else don't I know? The question sat heavy in his chest, a dark and unrelenting weight, as he drove away. The lawyer's office was quiet, almost sterile. The sound of the ticking clock on the wall felt louder than it should, each second a reminder of the life Noah was leaving behind. He sat at the long wooden table, the divorce papers spread before him, crisp and unmarked except for the faint smudge of ink from the lawyer's earlier note. Noah stared at the papers, the words blurring into a sea of legal jargon. Dissolution of marriage. The phrase hit him harder than he'd expected. His hands rested on the table, steady but cold. As he picked up the pen, it felt heavier than it should, as if it carried the weight of 12 wasted years. He didn't sign immediately. His eyes drifted toward the window, his mind pulling him back to moments that now felt like someone else's life. It was the 4th of July. Rachel's laugh rang out as fireworks lit the sky above them. Evan, only 5 at the time, was on Noah's shoulders, his tiny hands reaching toward the glittering bursts of color. Look, Dad! Evan had yelled, his voice full of wonder. Noah had looked up, his heart full, Rachel's hand warm in his own. Now, that memory felt distant. Tainted. Had Rachel already been lying to me then? Had she been looking at me with guilt in her eyes, even as she smiled? The sound of the lawyer clearing his throat brought Noah back to the present. Take your time, the man said gently. Noah didn't respond. Instead, he flipped to the next page, scanning the details of the custody arrangements. His chest tightened as he read Evan's name. Joint custody. 3 words that meant he'd only see his son part-time. He set the pen down, his hand trembling. His mind swirled with questions he'd been avoiding. Would Evan hate me for this? Would he understand? Could I explain this in a way that didn't make Rachel the villain in his eyes? Another flashback hit him, this one from a rainy afternoon. Noah and Rachel were on the couch, Evan asleep between them, his small head resting on Noah's chest. Rachel had traced lazy circles on Noah's hand, whispering, "We've got a good life, don't we?" He had smiled and nodded, believing every word. But had she? Or had Rachel just been pretending, her lies building layer upon layer even then? Noah exhaled sharply, pushing the memories aside. His lawyer's voice broke through again, this time softer. "You don't have to do this today, Noah." But Noah shook his head. "I do." He picked up the pen again, this time letting it hover over the signature line. His grip tightened as he pressed the tip to the paper, his movements deliberate as the ink bled onto the page. A strange mix of relief and sorrow washed over him. When he finally set the pen down, it felt as though a part of him had been severed, left behind with the papers. Noah leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. The silence in the room was deafening now, the ticking clock a steady drumbeat in his ears. On his way out of the office, the receptionist offered him a polite smile, but Noah barely noticed. The cool air hit his face as he stepped outside, grounding him. He stood for a moment, letting the decision settle over him. This is it, he thought. The end of us. The end of what I thought was real. Yet even as he walked to his car, he couldn't shake the ache in his chest. The papers might end the marriage, but they couldn't erase the memories, nor could they change what mattered most, Evan. Noah slid into the driver's seat and gripped the wheel. "It's not over," he murmured to himself. Not for him. As he started the engine, a flicker of resolve replaced the doubt that had shadowed him for days. He couldn't undo the past, but he could still fight for a future with his son. The house was quiet, save for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Noah stood in the doorway to Evan's room, his heart breaking at the sight before him. Evan was sitting cross-legged on his bed, focused on assembling a Lego spaceship, his little tongue poking out in concentration. For a moment, Noah just watched, memorizing the scene, every detail of his son's innocence, his joy, his world untouched by the storm raging between his parents. Noah cleared his throat, and Evan looked up, his face breaking into a smile. "Dad, check this out," he said, holding up the half-built spaceship, pride shining in his eyes. Noah forced a smile, stepping into the room. "That's awesome, buddy. You're getting so good at these." Evan grinned, patting the spot beside him. "Help me finish it." Noah sat down, the mattress dipping under his weight. He picked up a Lego piece, turning it in his hands, but his chest felt too heavy, his thoughts too loud. He placed the piece down carefully and looked at his son. "Evan, we need to talk." Evan's smile faltered, his hands pausing mid-measure. "Am I in trouble?" he asked hesitantly. "No," Noah said quickly, shaking his head. "You're not in trouble. You haven't done anything wrong." Evan tilted his head, his brow furrowing. "Then what's wrong? You look sad." Noah swallowed hard, the words lodging in his throat. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "Your mom and we've been having a tough time lately. And I think I need to take a little break. Just for a while." Evan's eyes widened, panic flashing across his face. "You're leaving? Why? Did I do something wrong, Dad?" The question hit Noah like a punch to the gut. He reached out, pulling Evan into his arms. "No, buddy. Never. This isn't about you. This is about me and your mom. We have some things to figure out." Evan's small arms wrapped around him tightly. "But why can't you stay? Can't you and Mom just talk?" Noah's voice broke as he answered, "Sometimes talking isn't enough. But I promise you this, I will always be here for you. Always." Evan sniffled, his face buried in Noah's chest. Are you coming back? Noah blinked back tears, holding his son closer. I'll see you all the time. This isn't forever. And no matter where I am, you're always my boy. My best buddy. The words felt hollow, but Noah knew they were the only truth he could offer in that moment. He pulled back just enough to look Evan in the eyes. You know how much I love you, right? Evan nodded, tears streaming down his cheeks. I love you too, Dad. Noah hugged him again, tighter this time, tighter than he ever had, tighter than he thought possible. He wanted to freeze the moment, to hold on to the purity of Evan's love and trust before the weight of the world could taint it. Can you promise me something? Noah asked softly. Evan nodded against his chest. Anything. Keep being the amazing kid you are. Keep being kind. Keep being curious. And don't ever doubt how much you're loved. I promise, Evan whispered, his voice trembling. Noah stayed like that for what felt like an eternity, memorizing the feel of his son in his arms, the scent of his hair, the sound of his breath. Finally, he forced himself to stand, placing a hand on Evan's cheek. I have to go now, buddy. But I'll see you real soon, okay? Evan wiped his eyes, nodding bravely. Okay. As Noah walked out of the room, he stopped at the door, turning back one last time. Evan was watching him, clutching the Lego spaceship like it was a lifeline. Noah gave him a small smile, trying to mask the pain tearing him apart. I love you, Evan. I love you too, Dad, Evan said, his voice small but steady. Noah closed the door behind him, leaning against it as the weight of the moment crushed him. The sob he had been holding back escaped, raw and guttural, echoing in the quiet hallway. Noah leaned against the closed door, tears streaming down his face. The weight of the goodbye crushed him, but he knew it was the only way to shield Evan from the chaos. As he left the house, his heart broke all over again, but one thought kept him moving: this is for him. This is all for him. Noah sat in his dimly lit apartment, the silence gnawing at him. The air was heavy with the smell of stale whiskey and regret, the remnants of a sleepless night still clinging to him. He stared at the manila folder on the coffee table, its edges worn from his restless hands. The paternity test had become both his torment and his tether, a cruel reminder of how quickly his life had unraveled. A knock at the door shattered the quiet. Noah frowned, glancing at the clock. It was late, too late for visitors. He approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. His stomach dropped when he saw Rachel standing on the other side, her face pale, her eyes rimmed red. He opened the door but didn't invite her in. What are you doing here? He asked coldly. Noah, she started, her voice trembling. Please, I need to talk to you. Noah hesitated, then stepped aside. She entered slowly, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if bracing against a storm. The tension in the room was palpable, the air thick with unspoken words. I don't want to hear more excuses, Noah said, his tone flat. You've said enough. Rachel turned to face him, her eyes brimming with tears. It's not an excuse. It's the truth. The real truth. Noah scoffed, crossing his arms. The real truth. Like the one you gave me 12 years ago. Or the one in that folder. His voice sharpened, cutting through the fragile quiet. Rachel flinched but didn't back down. I lied, she admitted, her voice cracking. But not the way you think, Noah. Daniel isn't Evan's father. The words hit Noah like a physical blow. He stared at her, his mind struggling to process what she just said. What the hell are you talking about? Rachel took a step closer, her hands shaking. I faked the test. I made it say you weren't his father. Noah's jaw tightened, his voice rising with fury. You lied again. After everything. He turned away, running a hand through his hair, his chest heaving with anger. Why? What possible reason could you have for doing something so cruel? Tears streamed down Rachel's face, her voice desperate. Because I knew I didn't deserve you. I thought if you knew the truth, you'd leave me anyway. I was scared, Noah, scared that one day you'd realize I wasn't good enough for you. Noah turned back to her, his eyes blazing. So you decided to rip my life apart instead? You thought this was better? You didn't just betray me, Rachel, you betrayed Evan. You turned our lives into a lie. Rachel sobbed, her words tumbling out in broken fragments. I was selfish. I was terrified. And then it just got harder and harder to tell you the truth. I thought if I pushed you away, it would hurt less for both of us. Noah laughed bitterly, the sound devoid of humor. Hurt less? You think this hurts less? He grabbed the folder, holding it up like a weapon. This piece of paper destroyed everything, Rachel. You destroyed everything. Her knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, her shoulders shaking. I know, she whispered. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't even deserve to be here right now. But I couldn't let you believe it anymore. You're Evan's father, Noah. You always have been. Every part of him, it's you. The room fell silent, the weight of her confession settling over them like a heavy fog. Noah's anger burned bright, but beneath it, confusion and exhaustion tugged at him. He sat down across from her, his voice quieter now, though no less sharp. Why now, Rachel? Why tell me this after everything? She looked at him, her tear-streaked face filled with anguish. Because I can't keep living with this. I can't keep running from the truth. I know it's too late for us, Noah, but it's not too late for you and Evan. He loves you. He needs you. Noah leaned back, his head resting against the wall as he closed his eyes. His mind reeled, caught between fury and heartbreak. You didn't just take away my trust, Rachel. You took away my choices. My chance to be angry. My chance to understand. You decided for me. I know, she whispered, her voice hollow. And I'll regret it for the rest of my life. The silence stretched, heavy and unrelenting. Noah finally opened his eyes, staring at the folder in his hands. It felt meaningless now, just a collection of lies stacked on top of more lies. If you really wanted to protect me, he said finally, his voice edged with steel, you should have trusted me with the truth. But you didn't. And I don't know if I'll ever forgive you for that. Rachel nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I'll leave now, she said softly, standing. I needed you to know. Noah didn't respond. He stayed rooted in his chair, his eyes fixed on the folder. As the door closed behind her, the apartment was silent once more, but the quiet felt heavier now, burdened with a new kind of pain. If she could lie to me about this, what else has been a lie? The thought lingered, relentless and unyielding, as Noah sat in the dim light of his shattered reality. The morning sun poured through the windows, casting golden streaks across the living room floor. Noah stood in the kitchen, staring blankly at the coffee pot as it gurgled. He clutched his mug, its warmth offering little comfort against the cold ache in his chest. The apartment felt emptier than ever, the weight of Rachel's confession still suffocating him. I need to make this right, for Evan. The thought repeated in his mind like a mantra as he turned toward the door. Noah's hands were busy cracking eggs into a bowl. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sizzle of bacon on the stove. For the first time in weeks, the apartment felt alive again. Evan bounded into the room, still in his pajamas, his hair a messy halo of curls. What's for breakfast, Dad? He asked, his voice bright and full of anticipation. Noah turned to him with a smile that came a little easier now. Eggs, bacon, and pancakes. Think you can help me flip the pancakes? Evan grinned, dragging a chair over to the counter. I'm the pancake master, remember? Noah chuckled, handing him the spatula. That's right. Let's see if you've still got it. Later that afternoon, the two of them were in the backyard with a basketball between them. The court was cracked, weeds pushing through the edges, but to Evan, it didn't matter. First 1 to 5 wins. Evan announced, dribbling the ball with exaggerated focus. All right, but don't go crying when I crush you, Noah teased, crouching slightly as he prepared to block him. Evan darted to the left, his small frame slipping past Noah's half-hearted defense. He shot the ball, and it arced through the air before swishing through the net. Yes! Evan shouted, his arms raised in triumph. Noah laughed, grabbing the ball and tossing it back to him. All right, champ. Let's see if you can do it again. As the game went on, Noah found himself marveling at the simple joy of the moment. The anger and pain that had consumed him just days before felt distant now, replaced by something softer, something steadier. The sound of Evan's laughter filled the yard, pushing back the silence that had haunted Noah since he left their home. That evening, they stood side by side in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. Evan wrinkled his nose at the onions. Why do onions always have to be in everything? Because they make everything better, Noah replied, smirking. Besides, aren't you the guy who said you'd try anything once? Evan rolled his eyes but gamely added the onions to the sizzling pan. Fine, but I'm still not eating Brussels sprouts. Noah feigned shock. Brussels sprouts are the best part. What kind of heathen am I raising? Evan burst out laughing, the sound bright and unrestrained. Noah couldn't help but laugh along, the warmth of the moment filling the room. As the days turned into weeks, their routines grew more familiar, more natural. Noah found himself waking up earlier, eager to start the day with Evan. They tackled homework together, played board games on rainy afternoons, and spent evenings watching old movies on the couch. Each moment felt like a step forward, a piece of their bond mended. One night, after tucking Evan into bed, Noah sat in the hallway for a moment, just listening to his son breathe. The small rise and fall of Evan's chest was a reminder of everything that truly mattered. The doubts and anger that had plagued him began to fade, replaced by a quiet determination. He couldn't change the past, but he could make the present count, for Evan and for himself. On a particularly warm Saturday, they decided to build a treehouse in the backyard. Noah hadn't picked up a hammer in years, but Evan's enthusiasm was contagious. They spent hours sketching plans, sawing wood, and hammering nails. By sunset, they had the frame of what would eventually be a small but sturdy hideout nestled in the branches. Evan climbed the ladder they'd attached to the trunk, peering inside the unfinished treehouse. This is going to be awesome, he said, his face glowing with excitement. Noah stood below, looking up at his son with a smile that reached his eyes. It already is. The apartment felt different now, warmer, fuller, alive. The spaces that once felt suffocating with silence were now filled with laughter, the hum of life returning. Noah knew they still had a long way to go, but each shared moment, each smile, each laugh was a reminder that they were rebuilding something stronger. As they sat on the porch that evening, watching fireflies dance in the twilight, Evan leaned his head against Noah's arm. I'm glad you're here, Dad. Noah swallowed the lump in his throat, resting a hand on Evan's shoulder. Me too, buddy. Me too. Noah sat at the corner table of a quiet coffee shop, his hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm coffee. The scent of roasted beans lingered in the air, mingling with the faint hum of conversation from other patrons. He stared out the window, watching cars pass by, his thoughts heavier than the gray clouds overhead. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor broke his trance. Rachel sat down across from him, her movements tentative, her hands clasped tightly around a small purse. She looked tired, older somehow, her eyes shadowed with regret. Thanks for meeting me, she said softly. Noah nodded but didn't respond immediately. He took a sip of his coffee, letting the silence stretch. Finally, he set the mug down and met her gaze. What do you want, Rachel? She flinched slightly at the sharpness of his tone but pressed on. I wanted to talk about Evan. About how we're going to handle things moving forward. Noah leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. That's all I care about now. Evan. Rachel's lips trembled, and she looked down at her hands. I know, and I'm sorry, Noah. For everything. I wish I could undo it all. Noah's jaw tightened, his voice calm but firm. You can't. And I'm not here to rehash the past, Rachel. What's done is done. We need to focus on what's best for Evan. Rachel looked up, tears pooling in her eyes. I've made so many mistakes. I don't even know how to fix this. Noah exhaled, his expression softening slightly. We can't fix it, but we can make sure Evan doesn't suffer for our mistakes. That's the only thing that matters now. Rachel wiped at her eyes, nodding. You're right. He deserves better than the mess I've made. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of their shared history hung between them, heavy and unspoken. Noah thought about all the years they'd spent together, the laughter, the love, the lies. It felt like a lifetime ago, like it belonged to someone else entirely. You'll always be a part of his life, Noah said finally. I won't keep him from you. But our marriage, it's over, Rachel. I can't go back to what we had, or what I thought we had. Rachel's face crumpled, but she didn't argue. Instead, she nodded, her voice barely a whisper. I understand. Noah looked away, his gaze falling on the people outside moving through their lives with purpose. Evan doesn't need us fighting. He needs stability. That's what I'm going to give him. Rachel reached across the table, her hand stopping just short of his. I know I don't deserve it, but I hope one day you can forgive me. Noah met her eyes, his expression unreadable. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive you for what you did to me, he admitted. But for Evan, I'll try. She nodded again, her tears falling freely now. Thank you. The conversation shifted to logistics, custody schedules, school events, holidays. They spoke like business partners rather than former lovers, each carefully choosing their words. By the time the details were settled, the coffee in Noah's mug had gone cold, untouched. As Rachel stood to leave, she hesitated, looking back at him. I loved you, Noah, she said quietly. I know I failed you, but I did love you. Noah's throat tightened, and for a moment, he didn't trust himself to speak. Finally, he nodded. Maybe. But love isn't just words, Rachel, it's what you do. And what you did, he trailed off, shaking his head. Sometimes letting go is the greatest act of love. Rachel blinked, her expression crumpling before she quickly turned and walked away. Noah watched her leave, her figure disappearing into the busy street outside. He sat there for a while longer, the weight in his chest shifting slightly. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the beginning of something lighter, something new. Letting go was the first step, for himself, for Rachel, and most importantly, for Evan. The autumn leaves crunched under Noah's feet as he walked up the winding path to the hospice. The air was crisp, the faint scent of pine lingering in the breeze. It had been years since he'd last seen Rachel, their lives diverging after the divorce. Yet when he'd received the call about her illness, something in him couldn't stay away. The nurse at the front desk smiled warmly as she guided him to Rachel's room. She's been asking about you, she said gently. Noah nodded but didn't reply, his heart heavy with a mix of anticipation and dread. The room was small, the sterile smell of antiseptic barely masked by the faint floral scent of a vase of daisies on the windowsill. Rachel lay in the bed, her once vibrant features now thin and pale. Her eyes opened slowly as Noah entered, and despite her frailty, a faint smile touched her lips. Noah, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He pulled a chair close to her bed, his hands resting awkwardly on his knees. Hey, Rachel, he said softly. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. Then Rachel broke the silence. "I didn't think you'd come." Noah looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "But then I thought about Evan, and I thought, maybe I needed to." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, her voice trembling. "I know I don't deserve this, your kindness, your time, but I'm so grateful you're here." Noah shifted in his seat, his gaze falling to his hands. "Why didn't you ever tell me the truth? About everything, not just the test, but you?" Rachel's lips quivered, her frailty making her vulnerability even more pronounced. "Because I didn't know how," she said. "I didn't want you to see how broken I was. I thought if I could hide it, pretend to be someone better, you'd love me more." Noah frowned. "What are you talking about?" She closed her eyes for a moment, summoning the strength to continue. "I grew up in a house full of secrets. My dad was an angry man, and my mom, she tried to protect me, but she was too scared to leave him. I learned early on to bury things, to smile even when I wanted to scream." She paused, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "I carried that into us, Noah. I didn't know how to be honest, even with the person I loved most." Her confession stunned him, the pieces of their past clicking into place in a way they never had before. "You thought I'd leave you if I knew?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Rachel nodded. "I was scared you'd see me the way I saw myself, unworthy, damaged. So I lied. And then I lied again to cover the first lie. It was a cycle I didn't know how to stop." Noah leaned back in his chair, the weight of her words sinking in. "You didn't trust me," he said, more to himself than to her. "I didn't trust anyone," she admitted. "Not even myself." Silence filled the room again, but this time it was different, less heavy, more contemplative. Noah looked at her, the woman he had once loved so deeply, and saw her in a new light. She wasn't just the person who had hurt him, she was someone who had been hurting for far longer than he'd ever known. "I wish you'd told me," he said finally, his voice tinged with regret. "Maybe we could have figured it out together." Rachel smiled faintly. "Maybe. But I think some things needed to happen the way they did, for you, for Evan, even for me." Noah looked out the window, his thoughts swirling. He thought about Evan, now a teenager, thriving in ways neither of them could have imagined. He thought about the love they'd shared, flawed but real, and the lessons he'd learned through the pain. "Do you hate me?" Rachel asked, her voice trembling. Noah turned back to her, his expression soft. "No," he said. "I did for a while. But not anymore. I don't think I ever really could." Her tears spilled over, and Noah reached out, taking her frail hand in his. They sat like that for a long time, the years of anger and hurt slowly dissolving into something quieter, something close to peace. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting golden light across the room, Noah spoke again, his voice steady and reflective. "Life isn't about the lies we tell or the mistakes we make," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "It's about the love we leave behind." Rachel's hand tightened slightly in his, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Then maybe I did something right." Noah nodded, his heart full of a bittersweet understanding. They couldn't rewrite the past, but in that moment, they found something even more precious: forgiveness.